In the case of this article from the Daily Mail, the headline is so long that it reads as a short article unto itself. Jordan Peterson was suicidal, hooked on benzodiazepines, diagnosed as schizophrenic, and taken to Russia by his daughter, where doctors put him in an 8-day coma, as he promotes self-help book that publishers tried to can. Yeah, why don't you leave some of the story to be told in the article itself after the headline, folks? The crucial part of that headline is, quote, diagnosed as schizophrenic, close quote. Naturally, controversy is now swirling around this fact that multiple newspapers have fastened onto the detail that he was diagnosed as schizophrenic. And some people, I think, are just confused. They think that this is a case of defamation, that newspapers have inappropriately or falsely reported him to have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. No, he was diagnosed as schizophrenic, so the newspapers are not defaming him in any way if they report that as a fact. Both Peterson and his daughter seem to regard this diagnosis as incorrect or false, and they're entitled to their opinion, right? But that doesn't mean the journalists are lying if they report that he was indeed diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, what a different world we would be living in if Jordan Peterson had used his position of power and privilege to advocate for people who had been misdiagnosed with schizophrenia in the past, or even to challenge the medical establishment in general as to what it is we mean by schizophrenia. Anyway, I would say in the year 2021, we are at the midway point of an arc. At the beginning of the story, people regarded schizophrenia uncritically as a biologically real condition, just like malaria. And it is not. You may be aware that in the last few decades, the concept of a psychopath has gone through a similar sort of story, where people used to consider a psychopath a biologically real, innate condition. Some people were born that way, some weren't. And then, just with increasing skepticism and sophistication, people have come to regard psychopath as nothing more than a cultural concept. It's not a medical concept. It's not a biologically real concept. In as much as it's a diagnosis, it's really just saying your behavior conforms to this stereotype. And you know the thing about stereotypes, they're prejudicial. I'm sure you will have noticed that I have on screen here a formal peer-reviewed article, Discrimination and the Incidence of Psychotic Disorders Among Ethnic Minorities in the Netherlands. Yes, isn't that interesting? Highlighted in green, the incidence of schizophrenia is extremely high for several ethnic minority groups in Western Europe. Why do you think that is? Well, if you think this is a biologically real disease, if you even think it's genetic, you would view this evidence in one way. If you regard this as nothing more than a cultural convention, you would regard it in another. You might think that, hey, maybe, just maybe, some of these medical professionals are less sympathetic towards ethnic minorities and diagnose their misery or their extreme and erratic behavior as schizophrenia. Whereas if the same person had come in with the same conditions but maybe had white skin, or maybe spoke the language without a foreign accent, or maybe there weren't other cultural barriers to understanding what they were going through. I mean, it might not just be linguistic or racial prejudice, but just, you have a refugee from Afghanistan who shows up in your office and he's behaving in a very erratic way, and maybe the medical professional can't sympathize, can't relate to what's going on with him due to cultural barriers also. So when we start to regard schizophrenia more in this way, then these types of reports, quote, ethnic density of neighborhoods and incidence of psychotic disorders among immigrants, in green highlighted again, some studies suggest that ethnic density may influence the incidence of schizophrenia. Oh, you don't say. You don't say. Now, you in the audience can do your own reading and draw your own conclusions. Do you think we're in the middle of a story arc where schizophrenia was initially believed to be a medically real, biologically verifiable illness, and that more and more scientific evidence is just going to continue to prove that, continue to pin it down in the same way that we've researched cancer. We have an ever more precise understanding of different types of cancer and different symptoms and how to treat it. Do you think that's what's happening with schizophrenia now? Or do you think schizophrenia is going to start to transform as we examine it under the microscope and be revealed to be nothing more than a kind of cultural concept? These are the criteria used to diagnose schizophrenia in the United States, in Canada, generally in the Western English-speaking world, from a very famous book called the DSM. You must have 2 or more of the following features of your behavior, shall we say. 1, delusions. 2, hallucinations. 3, disorganized speech. 4, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. And then 5, negative symptoms, which has been updated in the DSM-5 to read diminished emotional expression, etc. At least one of these under the DSM-5 must be 1, 2, or 3. So if Dr. Jordan Peterson was diagnosed as schizophrenic, this would be the basis for that diagnosis. A medical professional with training and education very similar to what Dr. Jordan Peterson himself has, he's a specialist in the same field, interviewed him, examined him, and came to the conclusion that he was experiencing some combination of delusions, hallucinations, etc. And as you see, it must include at least one of numbers 1, 2, and 3, right? And at least 2 or more of the numbered items on this list. Now, I am not saying this with a lack of sympathy for Dr. Jordan Peterson or anyone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. You could be going through a very difficult time in your life for a number of reasons and get this diagnosis. And if you're gullible enough or weak enough, you could be put on mind-altering drugs that ruin the rest of your life. You could be rendered unemployable. You could start receiving government benefit checks. It can change your life forever. And the truth is, in many cases, not all, in many, it could just be that you are going through a period of crisis that you could come out of at the other end being, again, a highly effective person. Maybe. I'll tell you one thing. Item E in the formal diagnosis for schizophrenia, the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance, e.g., a drug of abuse, a medication, or another medical condition. So the claim that Dr. Jordan Peterson's erratic behavior was caused by medications he was taking is seriously challenged by the fact that in these conditions he was diagnosed not with akathisia. That's his preferred diagnosis. That's what he wants you to think he had. None of us have seen videotape of him having the symptoms of akathisia. I have on this channel in the past presented you with videotape of other people with that condition, genuinely have the condition and what it looks like. It's a horrifying condition, very serious symptoms. We don't know if he had it. What we know is a medical professional with exactly this kind of training examined him and came to the conclusion that this disturbance, whatever his erratic behavior was not attributable to drugs. That instead, Dr. Jordan Peterson is schizophrenic. Maybe we can practice doing the puppet show together.
Yes, that's all I needed. I need it all.